Lately I've been spending too much money on retro video games and equipment, trying to recapture something from my past. So I've decided that instead of spending my money that way, I can save money by trying to incorporate the samurai and monk lifestyle into my own life. And I really think it's gonna work. Hey, babe.
What?
Whoa, what the heck is going on? You finally lost your mind, man? No, I'm just trying something new. I'm not gonna buy retro stuff anymore.
Yeah, right. You built this place as like a shrine to retro gaming. There are even consoles in the end tables.
Alright, we get it? I've got a problem. Now leave me alone so I can go back to meditating. Whatever. I know you better than anyone. You'll be back at it before long. Oh, and by the way, did you know that they remade Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Switch? Well, that's one of your favorites for Game Boy, so just thought I'd let you know. Not buy video games to relive a part of my childhood. Not buy video games to relive a part of my childhood.
Paintbrush, why are you trying to neglect me?
Who's there? Show yourself!
Paintbrush, don't you remember how fun I was? Paintbrush, I know you can hear me. Don't you remember us?
Yes, I remember you both. What do you want from me?
You know what we want. We are no longer supported, but there is another, a younger version of us. Something that's not a collection.
You can't mean...
That's right. A Nintendo Switch and Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. And them we live on. Don't let us be forgotten.
I'm losing it. Yeah, you are. Just buy a Switch. You know you're going to. No, thank you. What? Where am I?
You have entered your meditation zone.
Meditation zone?
Take a deep breath and let everything go. Now imagine what it is that you desire.
What I desire? No. I said no. Fine. Let me out of here and I'll buy it. Damn it. Told you were gonna buy it. Whatever, just be quiet until it gets here. It's here. Oh. Oh yeah, here we go.
First off, I'd just like to take a second to take a look at the two intros for these games and just see where we've come from in the last almost 30 years. So, although you can see there's a dramatic difference between these two intros, you can really tell how much they wanted to honor and respect the source material. Another addition that I really love about this game is the update to the music. It just sounds so beautiful. This game feels a lot like the original, and if you were fortunate enough to play that version back on the old brick Game Boy, I think that you'll find that although the current video game market is oversaturated with remakes, this one feels very welcome. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel with this one, and it stays quite true to the original. First, let's talk about the graphics. In my opinion, this game stays true to the feeling of the original game in a graphical sense, which I really appreciated. The characters are more chibi or cartoony than most of the games. I would say maybe even more so than Wind Waker. But I would say that it matches the original in tone very well. That being said, I felt myself being a bit disappointed by how many of the textures feel a bit like brand new plastic. The trees, the flat ground, and some other things that should, in my opinion, be a little bit more matte in texture, have a reflective shine that I found slightly off-putting. It almost makes it feel like you're playing with toys instead of playing as a living character and exploring real locations. It's almost like they wanted everything in this game to feel shiny and new. Other than that, my only complaint, which admittedly is very minor, is it appears that the Switch struggles to maintain a constant 60 frames per second while playing this game. The only times that this was really noticeable is when switching screens, but your mileage may vary on this, and I noticed it more and more frequently later in the game, especially when you start to get items that help you traverse more quickly through the landscape of Koholint Island. But other than those few minor complaints, I really like the art style of this game, and it does its best to truly honor and respect its source material. Enemies and NPCs and locations all look very similar to the original game, with the addition of a pretty new set of paint, which occurs to me now, maybe everything in this is so shiny just because they forgot to let the paint dry before shipping this game.
Your jokes are terrible.
Next, let's talk about gameplay. The gameplay feels much like its original counterpart, and many of the animations look and feel familiar. There are several quality of life improvements in the gameplay, one of my favorites being several of the warp points placed around the world that allow for fast travel across the map. Later on, you can even get a song for your ocarina that allows you to warp from anywhere in the world, even from dungeons. Now, warping did exist in the original, but you would just fall in a hole that would spit you to the next designated hole, and it could take quite a few times to get to where you wanted to be, and you basically had to memorize where it was going to spit you out next. Another upgrade comes simply from the fact that this is moved from being on a device that has a D-pad, start, select, and A and B buttons to a device that has two joysticks, a D-pad, A, B, X, Y, L1, L2, R1, and R2 buttons. Usable items can be mapped to X and Y, which allows you to be able to have your sword and shield at all times. Combat feels fairly tight and satisfying as well, although I did find myself at times wishing that there was a way to lock on to enemies, and maybe even a way to roll or dodge while locked on. The lack of this can make some of the boss fights feel more like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, where you and the boss are just whacking each other as fast as you can to see who gets the kill. This is only part of the time though, and in classic Legend of Zelda fashion, you need to find the boss's weakness and use good technique to defeat them. The game also contains the same minigames you'll remember from the original, such as the crane game and the fishing game. The crane game functions a little bit differently than it did in the original, but it doesn't take too long to get down. The fishing game is fun to see return as well, and it's a good way to get a bottle for fairies early in the game. The dungeons in this also feel very similar to the originals, and most of them have puzzles that range from being exactly the same as what they were in the original to slightly different to keep things feeling fresh. The dungeons also don't take overly long to get through, and I found that I was able to complete a few dungeons a night on my first playthrough, only committing 2 or 3 hours per session. The creators also added a new gameplay variant in the form of a dungeon creator, which is a very interesting feature. Fairly early in the game, you will run into an NPC named Dompe, who you will have to visit in order to create these dungeons and unlock new rooms and items to add to the dungeons that you create. The coolest part about this is once your dungeons are complete, you can share them with your friends so that they can try out the dungeons that you've created and vice versa. The only real benefit though of playing through your own dungeons or others is that you get to keep the rupees that you find in them. Other than that, all the items that you acquire in the created dungeon will have to be returned. Although this is a neat feature, if you don't know other folks with the game like me, you may not feel a real draw to engage with this game mode unless you can't get enough of the game after the credits roll. Alright, now that we've covered gameplay, let's talk about one of my favorite parts of this game, the music. Now, I probably have rose-colored glasses for the music in this, but I have to say that Link's Awakening probably has my favorite soundtrack of all the Legend of Zelda franchise. Although I do very much enjoy the soundtracks for Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time, the original tracks that have been remade into full symphonic renditions in this game sound absolutely fantastic. The music really speaks for itself, and I think it's great. It adds a lot of character to the original tracks. Now finally, let's cover a little bit about the story without spoiling anything. I decided not to cover the story until the end of this because I figured most people would honestly already know about the gist of this story by this time, especially since the original game has been out for almost 27 years at this point. That being said, the story starts out with our main character having his ship destroyed in a storm out at sea and waking up on the shore of an unknown island. You are taken in and wake up in the home of locals Marin and her father. After a short jaunt out to the beach to get your sword, you are greeted by an owl, not all that unlike the owl that guides you in Ocarina of Time, and told that you are someone destined to wake the windfish. The rest of the game, you will find yourself delving into dungeons searching for a set of instruments that, when played together, are said to wake the great windfish. Oh, and by the way, the windfish is a giant egg on top of a mountain. So yeah, it's the classic Japanese fever dream layout for a story that we all know and love. If you play this game rather slowly, I'd say you could get up to 15 hours out of this game or more if you really delve into the dungeon creator, which for someone like me who can only put a few hours a night in a few days a week, it can make the game last quite a while. Now that we've covered everything, you're probably wondering, what's the verdict? What's the score? What should I think? Well, at the end of the day, that's completely up to you and your own personal tastes and opinions. That being said, I would give this game 9 Master Swords out of 10. I think it makes a nearly perfect remake of a classic game that is close to my heart, and the only flaws, to me, being the plastic textures and the inability to maintain 60 frames per second throughout the gameplay, are very minor. Although these flaws are minor, it is enough for me to drop 1 from the final score.
So it looks like you're back to building your collection. Who would have guessed? I'm going to go meditate right now. Sounds good. Oh, by the way, did you know this isn't the only Legend of Zelda game on the Switch?